Luxembourg is the only country in the world whose prime minister is openly gay. We are talking about one of the most tolerant, open-minded societies on the planet. In fact, they have a population of around 500,000 inhabitants and 40% of them are immigrants. In other words, Luxembourg is the smallest country in the European Union, but the one with the biggest share of immigrants. Nonetheless, what made Luxembourg famous can be summarized in just one word, and that word is money. Yes, dear viewer, the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg is one of the 3 wealthiest countries on Earth. Here, the minimum wage is around 2,000 euros a month. No, that's not average wage, that's the minimum wage. The normal wage in Luxembourg, 5,000 euros a month. For comparison, Luxembourgish people have a GDP per capita twice as big as that of Australians or the Danes. Alright, but just hold on for a second because there is a little trick in this figure. You see, almost half of the workers in this country actually live outside of it. Every day, around 160,000 people commute to this country and then go back to their homes in Germany, France, or Belgium. In other words, they create wealth in the country, but they don't live there. This is why, when we divide Luxembourg's GDP among their population, we get such an enormous number. But even with these statistical deviations, no one can deny that Luxembourg is kind of a country for millionaires. And this explains why its capital, Luxembourg City, is among the cities in the world with the highest quality of life. Many of you might think that this can all be explained because Luxembourg is a fiscal haven. But the truth is that other countries like Malta and Cyprus also have low taxes, but they are not even half as rich as Luxembourg. So the big question here is, what does Luxembourg have that makes them so incredibly wealthy? What did they do in this country to enjoy such a fantastic quality of life? Today, well, we are going to answer that very question. But before we do, let's take a look back at the history.
The Kings of Steel.
By the year 1815, the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg became an independent country. And I say independent because none of its neighbors really recognized its independence. France and Prussia, what Germany used to be back then, fought for control of the duchy on several occasions. In fact, despite their government's desire for independence, the territory of Luxembourg was owned by King William III of the Netherlands. During these years, Luxembourg was far from being a wealthy country. Most of its citizens survived thanks to agriculture and iron mining. Back then, 1 in every 5 people from Luxembourg was emigrating to America. Nonetheless, living between 2 rival countries like France and Prussia had its advantages too. You see, during this time, Germany didn't exist as a country. Instead, there were a lot of republics, kingdoms, and duchies united under a confederation. If you want to know what a confederation is, well, click on this video. The truth is, all the German states traded among themselves. They'd basically created a special free trade zone, which they called the Zollverein. Alright, so in 1942, Luxembourg became a member of this Zollverein. And since that point, history, well, it would never be the same again. As I said before, poor Luxembourg was based on 2 main industries, agriculture and iron mining. And remember here, these are the times of the Industrial Revolution. Steel was needed for, well, basically everything. It was used in everything from machines to buildings. And Luxembourgish citizens, well, they were sitting on top of a pile of iron. But not only that, we're talking about a tiny country placed in the intersection between France, Germany, and Belgium. In other words, it was the perfect point to have a railroad so they could send the iron to all 3 countries.
All of a sudden, Luxembourg became ground zero for all of these trade routes, as well as one of the biggest steel providers on the planet. In fact, many of those New York skyscrapers were built with beams made in this country. This is why the biggest steel companies are Luxembourgish. The biggest of them all, ArcelorMittal, is one that you might have even heard about in financial newspapers.
In other words, in just a few decades, Luxembourg got to the same level as its neighbors, but still it was not the economic behemoth that it is today. They still needed a special sauce, and, well, that special sauce was this.
1929.
This is the year when Luxembourg passed the holding law. But wait just a minute here, because you might now be wondering, well, what's corporate holding all about? Well, let's take Coca-Cola as an example. On the one hand, Coca-Cola is a beverage brand, but on the other hand, there is the Coca-Cola Company. This is a big conglomerate that contains other companies like Fanta, Schweppes, or Coca-Cola, the beverage brand itself. Okay, so this big conglomerate is called a holding corporation, and the companies inside it are called subsidiary companies. These subsidiaries can be in different countries and are the guys who produce and distribute the drinks. However, the role of the holding company is mainly to manage the property of these other subsidiary companies. Alright, so this 1929 law, it offered amazingly good tax conditions to those holding companies. Basically, they paid around 1% tax. So these were the 1930s, and back then there weren't as many holding companies as there are today. Just remember that those were the years when Coca-Cola was starting to expand to other markets. So Luxembourg was doing great, but they still weren't the giant that they are today. In other words, Luxembourg was growing, but not that much more than other countries. Nonetheless, the 70s were the times when American companies conquered the European and Asian markets that finally had some money to spend on consumer goods. During these years, many of the big corporations we know today were born. In other words, a lot of holdings sprang up, and their profit came from all around the planet. So, where did they decide to set up their headquarters? Well, since they could choose anywhere they wanted to, they went to the places with the best fiscal conditions. And Luxembourg had everything they wanted, and a whole lot more. You see, by the 1960s and the 1970s, the country already had a big banking industry. The best lawyers, accountants, and economists were living there, ready to help those big companies in order to take advantage of those business-friendly laws. And this is how this little country got into their silver decade. Yes, do believe what you see. The economy of Luxembourg became 2 times bigger in less than 6 years. Compared to this, China or Singapore's growth rate is kind of a joke. And yes, you heard that right. I did say before, silver decade, because all of this growth was nothing compared to what was to come.
Think about it. We are already talking about the 2000s, the age of the online business boom. These brand new corporate juggernauts operated all over the world, had dozens of subsidiary companies in every country, and were not concentrated in any specific location because they sold everywhere.
In other words, these tech companies were made to love Luxembourg. So if you thought this country was already astoundingly rich and couldn't grow more, well, do think twice. It's amazing, isn't it? I don't know if you noticed this, but in just 5 years, Luxembourg's GDP per capita went from $50,000, which is already a lot, to over $100,000. When you live in a country with a GDP per capita of over $100,000, well, you can fill your swimming pool with champagne. In fact, the Audi A3 is the 3rd best-selling car in Luxembourg. And yes, well, I probably do know what you're thinking right now. You think that this country has made its fortune by helping companies avoid paying their taxes, right? Well, the answer, it's a little bit more complicated than that. You see, the fact that a holding corporation is located in Luxembourg does not mean that its subsidiary companies don't pay taxes elsewhere. For instance, Amazon has its headquarters in Luxembourg. Nonetheless, its British subsidiary, that is, the company that sells products and manages logistics in this country, still has to pay taxes in the UK. Or at least that is the theory. In fact, the reality is way different.
Lux leaks.
So let's get back to our Amazon example. As we said, the profits of its British subsidiary are taxed in the UK, right? Well, the question that then comes up is, what if they don't have any profits whatsoever? Imagine that right after they pay taxes, Amazon UK gets a big loan with a really high interest rate. So high, in fact, that the company takes losses. And who lends them that money exactly? Well, of course, that would be Amazon Holdings in Luxembourg. This way, the subsidiary companies have almost no profits. One way or another, they manage to send their money to the Luxembourg branch, and as we said before, in Luxembourg, taxes are really low for companies. Of course, all of this is perfectly legal. But in 2009, during the financial crisis, the American government realized the huge amount of money they were losing with all of these big companies moving overseas.
That's why today I'm announcing a set of proposals to crack down on illegal overseas tax evasion, close loopholes, and make it more profitable for companies to create jobs here in the United States.
Since then, other governments have also followed in Obama's steps. Now, don't forget, Luxembourg is one of the European Union's founding members. This means the other club members were angry and willing to lay on a lot of political pressure.
But the biggest crisis for this country came in the year 2014. This was the time when a group of accountants released a ton of private data from these big corporations. Thanks to the so-called Lux leaks, we could all see the tax evasion strategies employed by thousands of different companies.
Now, do you remember what I told you about loans between different subsidiary companies within a holding? Well, here is another way of improving the deal. You see, all these big companies hire big consulting firms so they can help them with their accounting. Consulting firms like PricewaterhouseCoopers, with a big customer portfolio in Luxembourg. They had enough power to sit down with the Prime Minister back then, Jean-Claude Juncker, and arrange a special tax deal.
Juncker in spotlight after Luxembourg tax revelations. The leaked documents demonstrate tax arrangements negotiated by PricewaterhouseCoopers.
As you can imagine, the release of the Lux leaks was a total game changer. In fact, this year, 2017, Luxembourg passed a brand new fiscal reform. And probably many of these arrangements are going to have to change. But hold on just a minute here, because this doesn't mean that Luxembourg is going to stop being a rich place. In fact, the opposite is probably true. Despite this political turbulence, the country grew at a rate of 4.2% last year. This is way faster than almost any other country in Europe. Having so many savings, Luxembourg has invested in many other industries. Now, of course, they have steel, they have their banks, and they also have space.
Luxembourg's bet on space industry shows early signs of success.
Yep, you heard that right. In fact, Luxembourg and the United States are the first countries to pass laws regulating space mining. And this tiny country is expected to become the Silicon Valley of the aerospace industry. This explains, partly, some of the details of the 2017 fiscal reform. Of course, the government of Luxembourg doesn't want to help big corporations avoid taxes. At least this is what they say officially. Instead, they have reduced taxes for smaller companies and are actively trying to improve conditions in order to encourage more tech startups. But this is a subject for another video. Now, the question for you is, do you think we're going to see another moment of skyrocketing growth in Luxembourg's economy? Will this country truly become a world leader in the aerospace industry? Well, please leave your answer in the comment section below. We'd love to hear from you. Meanwhile, if you want to know more about a super wealthy country, click on this video to hear more about Qatar. And also, do not forget to visit our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. And don't forget that we publish brand new videos every week on Mondays and Thursdays, so hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. And as always, I'll see you next time.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear more of my lovely voice, don't forget to check out the Reconsider podcast at reconsidermedia.com. Reconsider is a podcast that challenges you to reconsider your views by providing context, but we don't do the thinking for you.